back to Storytime with Captain Xavier. I'm Chaylo Laurino, and I play Captain Xavier here on YouTube and in HVZs and online. And back in the day, back in my 20s, in a medieval recreation group called the Empire of Adria, as well as the Realms of Avalon, but that was a different group. And today's story comes from those days, from the Empire of Adria days, back when I was Duke of the Duchy of Alhambra, which consisted of Washington, Idaho, eastern Montana, and during my reign as Duke, it would actually expand because we went to war, we conquered lands, we did all sorts of stuff. It was good times. And this is the first border war was the first war that we went to with another subdivision, which was we went to war with the Shire of Gloucester, or Gloucester, or Gloucester, depending on how you want to pronounce it. I will probably pronounce it differently every time I say it in this video, and the people in England will go nuts. But that was Oregon, directly south of Washington. We ended up going to war with them. And it came about because they were primarily located in the Portland, Oregon area. And they had friends and colleagues, and some of them even worked in Vancouver, Washington, which is just across the river. They're basically one city divided by a river, but in different states and so in different subdivisions. And so they had a bunch of people that were interested in the Vancouver area and getting into the game, and so they wanted to hold an event in a park in Vancouver so the people could come to it and they could show them what it's about and combat and archery and all of this, and hopefully get them to join. But since Vancouver was in my subdivision, they had to have my permission, so they reached out to me. And of course, I had no problem with them hosting an event. We didn't have any members in that area at all. We had not yet gotten over the Cascades. We had started in Moscow, Idaho, and had been steadily moving west as well as east. We'd gotten into Montana. We'd gone as far as the Tri-Cities and somewhere up in north-central Washington. I don't remember where it was exactly. We had people in Spokane. We had people in Coeur d'Alene. But we hadn't gotten over the Cascades yet. We also hadn't gotten as far south as Boise. So our two largest population centers we hadn't even tapped into yet. But we had nobody in the Vancouver area, so I had no problems with them hosting an event there, recruiting there, all of that. The question did then come up, if we recruited them, if they're our friends and they go to our events and they do all of the stuff with us, shouldn't they be in our subdivision rather than your subdivision? And the reason that matters is rank of subdivision is based on number of members. So you start out as a shire. When you get enough members, once you get, I think, 25 members, then you become a duchy, and you get to have a duke, and you get a crown, and it's fancy and all of that. And then once you get to, like, I think, 50 or 75 members, you become an archduchy, and you get an even fancier title and more power and rights. And then once you reach 100, you become a kingdom. We were a duchy. We weren't very big yet, but we were respectably sized, and we were growing. They were still a shire. They were like less than a year old. We were 5 years old at this point, but we'd had a civil war, like an actual split where we lost a bunch of members who went to form the Realms of Avalon. But we thoroughly outnumbered them. And we definitely had more experience than them in war. We were a violent warmongering people. We had had at least a dozen wars over the course of the last 5 years, probably more. We had a couple of wars every year just because we enjoyed them. And there was a constant arms race because I was involved. So of course there was a constant arms race. We had missile weapons and arrows and spears and we had siege engines and fortifications and all of this stuff. And they were brand new to all this. Now, two of their two most prominent members, Dorn, their leader, Lord Dorn, and Lord Elric, were transplants from another organization. I think it was called the Empire of Chivalry and Steel. So they were experienced steel fighters, veteran steel fighters from another organization. So they had that going for them. But in terms of members, we severely outnumbered them, which is why they were wanting to recruit and all of that. Now, so they've recruited these people, but they're technically in my land. How does that work with them being their members? Well, there actually was a rule in the Adrian bylaws that covered this, which was that if you're within 100 miles of another subdivision, you can just be in that subdivision instead of whatever subdivision you're geographically located in. And that rule existed for exactly this reason. That some of the subdivisions were very large, and you might have people that are closer to a population group in another subdivision than in the subdivision that they actually are located in, which was exactly the case here. So it was all on the up and up. There was nothing sneaky, nothing sly, nothing underhanded about any of it. It was all perfectly legitimate. But this man had invaded my land and taken my people, and this means war. And that's what I told him. And I'm like, no, this is perfectly on the up and up. It's all right and good, but we have to have a war now. We've made contact. You've stolen my people. Invasion, war. And he was like, oh, that's awesome, we've never had a war, let's do this. And I went, oh, never had a war, you say. So the diplomat in me is going, we don't want to have a contested war, because my violent warmongering army will absolutely destroy them, and it won't be much fun for anybody. It'll be a little fun for us. But, I mean, it'll just be them getting kicked in the teeth for a weekend, and that's not going to be fun for anybody. So I recommended, okay, well, for this first war between us, let's have it be a fun war. We'll divide both sides up evenly, half of your people on each side, half of my people on each side, and we'll just fight it out. We'll make up some reason for the two sides to be evenly divided. Holy war, or, you know, something. We'll come up with something, and we'll just fight it out, and it'll be fun. Maybe we'll even switch sides up, just so you guys can learn what war is like. Your people can get used to it. You can understand what kind of equipment you need to get, what equipment exists, and all of that. And then the next year we can really duke it out and have a proper knockdown, drag-out brawl. And he said, okay, I'll take it back to my people and explain that to them, and we'll see how it goes. And so I started preparing for the next year's war, because it was pretty much determined at that point that I was going to be Duke for another year. And so we had Subdivision, like I said, we had a group in Moscow, Coeur d'Alene, Spokane area, Kalispell, Tri-Cities, spread out. And so I started organizing each of those small regions into their own company, with their own colors, their own tabards, their own flags, their own battle cries, their own NCO structure. Each group had their own little mini army in a very feudal style of, I could call upon the lords of each of those cantons to raise their troops, and they would raise their banners, and they would come marching, and we'd have organized companies and people who were experienced with fighting together because they were from the same area, and it would just be a much better army. And then 2 weeks before the event, 2 weeks before the war, Dorn comes back to me and says, we held a vote, we want it to be us versus you. And the diplomat in me is going, ugh, it's going to be a mess, they're not going to like it, we might not get to have that other war because they're not going to want to go to war with us after we've trounced them so badly, oh, it's going to be horrible. The evil pirate in me, on the other hand, was going, yes, I get to destroy somebody. So we marched to war. And it was glorious. The event was in their land, just across from the Tri-Cities, so it was relatively central. It was a little bit more in their favor, which they're hosting the event, that's fair. We had people coming all the way from Kalispell, Montana. And oddly enough, they got there first. We were hauling all of our equipment. And remember, the crew already existed in Avalon, but it was still fairly young. But it hadn't yet crossed over to Adria yet. That would happen later this year, I believe. Might have even been the year after that. I think it was later this year. And so Kyle, the sergeant major, though at the time he was only a sergeant, he was in Adria. He had been since as long as I had. And we brought over Sergeant Carl because I knew I was going to need at least another good, experienced battlefield commander. So I brought my other sergeant over. We got him made a member and qualified and all of that. So the three of us were driving down with all of our gear, and we were going very slow because we were holding a trailer full of shields and gear and God knows what else. And I explained, okay, here's the basic plan of how I would like to have our encampment set up. I'd explained it to my people, so if you get there first, scout out a location and wait for us to get there. And I'm pretty sure Doom and Seraphine passed us on the way there. Just had to have going 80 in a minivan, just tore past it. Like, was that Doom and Seraphine? I'm pretty sure it was. Okay. So they got there first, and they met Lord Dorn, and his people had gotten there way before we had. Some of them had been there since the night before. And he had kind of tried to get them to organize into something vaguely resembling an encampment and had failed. It was like herding cats, he said. And so when my people showed up, they all came out and like, oh, well, can we help you get set up? And they were like, well, we can't set up until the Duke gets here and tells us where he wants everything. And they're kind of like, oh, this is a little weird. That's a little culty. Who is this Duke? How does he he's not even here. How does he do it? And then we arrived, me and my two sergeants looking all impressive and whatever. We come waltzing up and we introduce ourselves to Dorn and Elric and his people, and we see their encampment. And he's like, oh, I was told they had to wait for it. Like, well, yeah, okay, so where are we setting up? So he shows us, this is the area we kind of had set up for you. So like, okay, I want this, I want the two carports, I want the castle set up here, and then the encampment will go here, here's what we're going to do, this will be our entrance, and go. And a half hour later, the entire encampment was up. And Dorn is just standing there going, how do you do that? Teach me the ways. And I jokingly told him, oh, it's the pointy hat. Once you have the pointy hat, it all just falls into place. And I shouldn't have said that because he took me seriously and it would cause him trouble down the line. Really, it was because I'm me. High charisma score. I don't know what it is. But we got our encampment set up, and the castle, as it were 2 10-foot by 20-foot carports. The metal frame and tarp carports. And one side was our armory, and the other side was, well, actually both sides were armory, but one was weapons and one was armor and siege engines. And then we had a courtyard in the middle, and then the encampment was set up in a big ring around the back. So a big circle of tents that you could get through. You go through the castle to get there, and it was lovely. And on the one side we had racks of pole arms and racks of swords and throwing axes and spears and javelins and arrows and bows and everything. On the other side we had suits of armor on racks and racks of shields and tower shields and siege engines and all of it. It was terribly impressive, apparently, especially when you're a brand new subdivision and you come walking into the castle with the armory, and it's like, good lord. We had way more weapons than we had people, but that's how armies work. So it was a lot of fun. We got it all set up, and then that night Dorn was having a meeting with his people, and he invited me and my 2 sergeants to come to this meeting. And I think there was actually part of the way wars in Adria work is it's not just combat. There is a combat portion. There are field battles and scenarios where you get points. There's also a target archery portion where it's just archers shooting at targets, and whichever side gets the most points, in the tournament, gets points towards winning the war. And then there's an arts and science portion, which is kind of like how things are entered in a county fair, where you enter your item, and then it's judged by a panel of judges based on a preset criteria of things like for historical accuracy, how well is it made, stuff like that. You had to do your research on, yep, I researched how to make this chainmail glove, or this clothing that I made, or this cooking dish that I did, or this piece of music, or this dance, or I made a painting, or whatever. Anything that you would make, because you can't just go to Walmart and buy most of the stuff you need for medieval recreation. You have to make it. Adria was big on education, so they encouraged you to do the research and to do it properly and to then teach how you did it. Part of all knighthoods required an element of teaching. You had to teach what you knew and what you had learned. And you had to have demonstrated that you had learned things in order to get your knighthoods, which I really liked that system. And you could get knighted in 4 different disciplines: combat, archery, arts and sciences, and ministry, which is helping run events. So part of that feast that night was an arts and science thing. Dorn was a professional chef, and so he had prepared a medieval feast. And he invited us to partake in the feast, and Sergeant Kyle ended up being one of the judges for that entry. And so he didn't have enough for everyone, so he invited just the leadership, because they were having this big palaver to discuss the war. Because the war was being fought in their subdivision. They were hosting the war, which meant they got to determine a lot of the rules and how the scenarios would be written and what would and wouldn't be allowed. And it had come to their attention that things were very much not equal. Not only did we have them outnumbered at least 2, if not 3 to 1, we had a massive advantage in firepower, in military technology, as it were. We had more weapons. We had better weapons. We had weapons they had never even known you could have. Javelins and throwing axes and stuff like that. They had no missile weapons at all yet. And I had arrows and javelins and ballistas and catapults and all of it. And so they were going to determine whether or not they were going to allow missile weapons. And to be clear, it would have been perfectly fair for them to not allow them, because if nobody has missile weapons, that's fair. And the goal there would be to make it more equal, because there is a very important difference between fair and equal. Fair means that the rules are applied the same to everybody. Equality is determined by a lot of other factors. If one side has more fighters, it's not going to be equal. No matter how fair you make the rules, it's not going to be equal because they have more. Or if their fighters are better, or if they have better equipment. And so the fact that we had more fighters, and better equipment meant there was no way it was going to be equal unless they changed the rules. And there are ways that they could have changed the rules that would have been unfair. For instance, if they decided they could have missile weapons but we couldn't, that would make the rules unfair. But since we had so many more people and better people, if they had had missile weapons, it might have made it more equal. But that's kind of where that was what they were having this discussion to determine, was how much do they want to tweak the rules in their favor to give themselves a better chance versus just letting things happen the way they were going to happen. And they asked us, do you have anything to say on this? And I said, well, first of all, missile weapons can be reused. So if we fire arrows at you or we throw javelins at you, if we don't kill you with them, you can pick them up and hurl them or shoot them right back at us. So this is an opportunity for you to get to play with missile weapons in a combat situation. It'd be, it would be fun. And I highly recommend that you pick up our weapons and throw them back and get in on it. And while I do regard this as a fair, if you decide not to allow missile weapons since you don't have any, I would regard that as perfectly fair, but we will mock you mercilessly forever for your cowardice. And I made sure that they knew that was, a joke. And so they called for a vote. Dorn said, okay, all in favor of allowing missile weapons. And there was just this dead silence as nobody wanted to be the coward who said no missile weapons first. And on my left, Sergeant Kyle goes, aye. So it was unanimous, plus one sergeant who kicked off the vote to allow missile weapons. At which point I informed them, just so you know, I have 5 arrows for every one of you. And Dorn goes, why didn't you tell us that before? So the food was delicious. And the next day the war started. Now, yes, we had them outnumbered. Yes, we were violent warmongering people. Yes, I knew that I was a good fighter. I was not yet at my best. I was definitely getting to be pretty good, but I was not at my absolute best yet. I hadn't been studying fencing as long. We had only just gotten steel armor because we were all poor and we couldn't afford full suits of steel armor. But I finally managed to cobble together a suit. Part of it was I made myself. Some of it was chainmail I got for Christmas. I made a pickle barrel breastplate out of a garbage can. I made some armor myself using leather, and I was able to cobble together a functional suit. At which point, 2 other people, Sir Mikos, who is still one of the finest men I've ever met, and the Sergeant Major managed to get their suits together. When Kyle came back from Iraq, we got him a Lorca Segmentata because he was a Romano-Celt character. And he managed to get a fairly decent fitting a helmet that went with that, and we put together the rest of a suit of armor. And so we had 3. And they had 2. Elric and Dorn, who'd come over from steel fighting, they had 2 steel fighters. So they weren't that horribly outnumbered. If they were really good, and we were all still very new, they could win 2 to 3 odds. We had them in Rapier, and we definitely had them outnumbered in the lighter Shania combat, but the other thing that happens in wars are champions battles. Your best fighter fights our best fighter, so numbers don't matter. And I had no idea how good they were. I knew these guys were veterans from another organization. They could have been amazing fighters. They might have taken me apart. I had no idea. I'd never seen them fight. I'd never fought them. This was going to be interesting. And it started out, they did steel, then rapier, then Shania, so we were slowly losing armor as the day went by because we were fighting in the desert of the Pacific Northwest. It was warm. So bright and early in the morning we get our steel on and we take the field. And Dorn decided to be their champion because he was their leader and the leader should be the champion. I did the same thing. Also, I was our best fighter, so I generally went as champion. Eventually, we ended up getting, there was someone who I considered to be a better duelist than me, and I would actually send him in to be my duelist because he was the better fighter, and that was the smart thing to do. But in this case, I went as my own champion, and Dorn went with 2 long swords with no thrusting tips. So he couldn't stab with them, he could only slash with them. And so looking at that combination, I went, okay, so I got a small round, a decent-sized round shield made out of a 50-gallon drum lid, and a short spear. In Adria, one-handed weapons couldn't be more than 5 feet long, which is weird because most one-handed thrusting spears are closer to 8 feet long, but I don't make the rules. So 5-foot thrusting spear. and a round shield. And I go into this fight, and I have no idea how good this guy is, and I have fought steel very, very little. I could be about to get wrecked. So I kept my distance, because I had reach on him. And we paired off for a little while, just kind of moving around, seeing how each other, gauging each other up. Audience on the sideline jeering and cheering, and go, Captain, and Dorn, and all of that. And I finally decided to make a feint. I made a feint thrust towards his gut to try to draw a parry, and he went for it. He went both swords straight down, trying to catch my spear in a cross, so he could then move in and chop. But, as I said, it was a feint, it was a second intention. I made the thrust, he parried, I pulled back, his parry missed, and I stabbed him in the throat. And the man went straight over backwards. I thought I had killed the man. I thought I collapsed his trachea, broke his neck, he was dead. Because the whole falling down thing wasn't a thing we did in an Alhambra. We had always been such a small subdivision that in order to make the battles really fun, we did multiple resurrection battles. So you got hit, you went, you touched the flag, you came back in, you kept fighting. So we never did the whole dramatic falling down dead. But this was a champions battle, so it kind of made sense. But they were from a group where they did the theatrics. They thought that was fun, that they felt it added to it, and that was cool. But we weren't ready for it. My whole crowd were just this sudden gasp of, Captain just killed somebody. Xavier killed a man, man's dead, this is not going to go well. He murdered him, murder! And I'm like, sir, are you okay? He's like, oh, no, well struck, excellent. I took it right on the gorget, well struck. I shouldn't have fallen for that feint, that was well done. Like, huh. Something in the back of my head went, you might want to bring up this whole falling down thing, because that's going to come up again later. But I didn't. And then we went to the steel battle. And Elric comes out, and he's got 2 swords, and Dorn has 2 swords, and so we, being the violent warmongering people we had, Mikos comes out, sword and shield, because you need at least one good sword and board person. Sergeant Kyle came out, tower shield and thrusting spear, because he's a Romano-Celt, and I went pike. I had a 10-foot pike. 10 feet was the maximum length a weapon can be in Adria, so we had a 10-foot pike. And I come onto the field and I plant this, and Dorn looks at it and goes, huh, compensating for something, Xavier? And I look at him and go, no, just trying to keep everything in proportion. Nice dagger you have there. Dorn learned quickly not to cross words with a bard. Elric also learned an important lesson that day. Don't drink the night before the war. You drink the night after the war. Because he was extremely hungover. And he takes the field, and as soon as they say lay on and the battle starts, I stab him right between the eyes with a pike. And he just went over backwards, and this time it was not theatrical. He was just blitzed. And then we killed Dorn and the battle was over. It was very short. The 2 guys in front didn't even get... I just stab. That was the battle. I think we did it... I think there were only the 2 battles in steel. There were more battles in Rapier and then more battles in Shania. Yeah. Murdered. And then we broke up and we had fun. I took one particular hit that I remember. Mikos was having fun with the pike. And I think I had short sword and axe or warhammer or something. I don't remember what I was armed with, but it's two weapons. I didn't have a shield. And I see Dorn over here on this side, and I'm keeping my eye on him. I'm getting ready to engage him. I see Mikos coming up, but he was a good distance off yet. I start moving towards Dorn. Dorn moves off to fight someone else. I go to engage Mikos, and he had closed the distance way faster than I expected. And I turn just to see the pike coming into my armpit, which is mostly unarmored, because it's very hard to armor an armpit. And I see this coming in, and I realize I can either stand my ground, and that thing will probably break one of my ribs, or at least give me bruising to the point that I won't be able to raise my arm. Or I can throw myself that way and hope that my armor doesn't break my neck when I fall. So I fling myself. And to the audience and to Mikos, it looked like he'd picked me a foot up off the ground with his pike and just hurled me across the field. And again, they're like, oh God, he killed the Duke. The Duke is dead. Died. Murdered. Why? Oh, the humanity. And I'm lying there on the ground going, I'm going to stay here. No, just go ahead. I'm fine. Carry on. Murder the rest of them. Leave me here to die. And it was a lot of fun. We then moved on to Rapier, which was the area that I was the most experienced in at the time. I've been taking fencing for a while. I'd gotten quite good at it. I had an excellent pair of rapiers, a longer one and a shorter one. And being left-handed, that gave me an advantage, and it was something I was very, very comfortable with. Elric comes out as their champion, and he also went to 2 swords, so he didn't have the longer one that I did. He had 2 short ones. And again, I have no idea how good this guy was. I mean, he was hungover for the steel battle. By now he's sobered up quite a bit. And for all I know, he could be an Olympic champion. I've never met this guy. I've never seen him fence. Don't know how good he is. So, again, we spend a minute or so just kind of testing each other. Parry here, a parry there, you know, a feint to an attack. And eventually I realize, no, he's got no disengage. He's got no counter parry. Okay. Beat, stab, stab. And just doink, doink, one in either peck. And down he goes. And this is Rapier. Rapier, we were a little bit more flashy and flamboyant because it's Rapier, it's swashbuckling, it's ho 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 when you get stabbed, and all of that. And so him falling down didn't quite register in my brain. And then we went to the Rapier battle, which was just a chaos. Because Rapier battles are generally chaos. You don't have a shield wall to form up in, and so there's more swashing and buckling and running around and parrying and ho-ho and musketeer type stuff. And it was fun, but we outnumbered them probably 2 to 1, give or take. I don't remember. They had more Rapier fighters, but then we also had more Rapier fighters. We hadn't yet started mass producing Rapiers so that just everyone gets a Rapier. But we had more of them. And so... yeah, they got slaughtered. And again with the falling down, but this time it didn't really register. Then we got to Shania. Now, Shania is the lightest form of combat. It requires very little armor, fencing mask, a little bit of padding, elbow pads, gloves, and a cup. It's the introduction combat. It's very light so that people can get into it quickly. There are still some armor requirements, but not as bad as like Rapier, where you have to have a metal gorget and a proper flexible fencing blade or steel where you're in a full suit of armor. It's something that you can get into for less than $100. You can get all the equipment, and it's easy to have loaner equipment that you can get and dole out to people. And so we had a lot more troops on the field there, but then so did they. But Champions Battle comes along. Elric is their champion, comes out with 2 swords. So I go out with a polearm and a dagger, short sword in my belt, but I go out with a polearm because that's how you beat Florentine. And again, with the testing, I feinted low. I was going for a low attack, but apparently I managed to get up under his guard enough to actually get him in the lower gut. And so it was a kill. But I thought it had been a leg shot. And in our group, if you get hit in the leg, you have to then fight from that knee. So I hit him in what I thought it was a leg shot, and he drops to his knees. And so I keep fighting. I assume the fight's still going. Well, turns out he felt it was a kill shot, that it was high enough. No, that was definitely in the gut. I'm definitely dead. So he was going to his knees to then dramatically slump forward. And I hit him in the leg, and without even, pausing to figure out what was going on, I reversed and drilled him between the eyes. Just spun around and whap! As the man was falling forward, I peg him right between the eyes, two-handed, and just obliterate the man. Just blasted him sideways. And he was like, what was with the second hit? I was already dead. And I went, oh, I'm sorry, I thought it was a leg shot. I thought you were still fighting. He's like, no, I was dead. And it finally clicked. Oh, our people aren't used to the whole falling down dead thing. We're used to, if you get hit, you say dead or hit or good or something, and then you get out of the way. You might want to warn your people for this big melee that's about to happen. Call your shots when you get hit, or we'll keep hitting you. And I don't know if he told them, but it clearly didn't register. Because we then formed up. I turned around and yelled to, the 2 leaders met in the middle and to discuss which battles we were going to be having. The first battle was just an open field battle. All of them against all of us. And so we go in and form up. I yelled to my army to form squads. And we had 18 fighters on the field. I think they had 8 or 9. But we were organized into 3 squads. Each had 3 shields. The center squad that I was leading had 2 pole arms, and then myself as an archer, and then the 2 flank squads had an archer, or 1 pole armor and 2 archers each. So we had 5 archers, each who had about 8 arrows. So yeah, we had 5 arrows for every one of them. All of my shieldmen had a javelin. All of my pole armors had a javelin. And we form into this, and you know, I yelled form squads, and the sergeants immediately start yelling form squads, and the shield walls form up, and the polemen get into the pikemen get into place, and Dorn is on the other side of the field watching this, going, getting a line or something. I think they had 1 or 2 shields, 1 pole armor, and everyone else just had a sword. And bless their hearts, these people knew no fear, knew no shame. They just charged right at us. The whole, just in a, like you see in the movies of the army of barbarians charging the Roman shield line, they just charged right at us. But the thing that they never show you in the movies is that when that happens, every one of the Romans had a javelin. And they would all hurl their javelin, which really messes up a charge. And then they'd close with swords. There's a reason the Romans were so effective. And we waited until their army was about 10 feet from us, from our shield line. And I yelled loose. And just a cloud of missile weapons came flying out. Every javelin, every arrow, everything. We were yelled at later by the camera crew because we hadn't warned them. Apparently it looked really cool cinematically. We were just this, and it was just a volley came out all at once, and it was absolutely perfectly timed, and nobody got it on camera, nobody got video because nobody was ready for it. I think one person, I think the pole armor survived because he had been behind the guy with the shield. I shot the guy with the shield in the forehead, and so everyone else was dead. The volley took out everyone but 1 pole armor, and then all of the archers shot him at once. And that was it. And that wasn't good enough for them. They wanted to do it again. That was for the point, so we got the point. They then wanted to go again, so they picked themselves up, and this was the part that was weird, that we were kind of going, we should, no, I'm not, you're going to tell them? I'm not going to tell them, no. They picked up all of our javelins and all of our arrows. They picked them all up off of, from amongst their corpses and handed them back. Okay. So they went to the other side of the field and bless their hearts, they charged right at us again. This time we didn't do the volley because that would have been too easy. So we let them close. And so we got a couple of people fighting Kyle's, like there's 2 people fighting Kyle's squad, there's 3 people fighting my squad, there's a couple of people fighting this squad over here, and they're not getting through. They have no idea how to take a shield wall. They're kind of tapping at our shields from a distance, like, murder. Yeah. And I hear an almost panicked call from Sergeant on the left flank, calling for fire support. And I look over like, what, is the flank collapsing? No, there's 2 guys fighting his 6 guys. None of his people have been taken out. They just got 2 guys with single swords kind of tapping at it. The archers in the back just kind of going, you guys got this. But I figured, why not? So I called to all the archers, shift fire left. And all the archers on the line focus on these 2 guys. And they pause and look at us, and you could see their eyes bug out inside their fencing masks as they realize what's about to happen, and then they get obliterated. At which point, Kyle's squad wheels and just rolls up their line like a carpet. Just went over the top of them. It was beautiful. The next battle was a Regicide, which means we don't have to kill all of them. We only have to kill their leader, and they only have to kill me. So we go out to the center. I go out to the center. I meet Dorn, and we explain. So and technically you can choose whoever you want to be your leader. And I've done Regicides where they don't have to tell you who the leader is. And it turns out the leader was 3rd guy from the left on the shield wall, and nobody was expecting it. But we decided we would announce who our leaders were. I, of course, chose to be my leader. He elected to be his leader. I then turned to my army, and you see the man standing there? Yes, I want him dead. And the whole army, die! And Torn sidesteps behind the guy with the shield, ducks. And bless their hearts, they came right at us. But this time we advanced as well, with the two flanks starting to curl in to try to take them. And I want to say they didn't allow missile weapons in this particular battle because it's a regicide, and though it's very fitting to have the leader get shot, because I think I shot Dorn in the head, very Battle of Hastings-esque. And I think I shot him in the head before the armies had really properly engaged. I think he stuck his head up over the shoulder and took an arrow to the forehead. And so the battle just kind of ended. I think we may have slaughtered them all anyway, though. I don't remember. But here is where that falling down dead came in. See, it didn't really matter in both of those. Because when we hit them with the whole volley and they all went down, that wasn't a problem. They were all dead. In the Regicide battle, I shot him in the head. He went down. That was the end of the fight. No problem there. But then we did a bridge battle. And a bridge battle wasn't actually being fought on a bridge. That would be incredibly dangerous. So we've done it a time or two. It just means that it's a very narrow battlefield. So it kind of negates the numbers. So you can only have 2 people standing side by side on the battlefield at a time. And then there's just cliffs. And if you step off, you plummet to your death. And then on the far sides, it opened up like it would, like there was a ravine. So you can have archers set up on the far side, shooting in and all of that. A quick addendum here, because if I don't mention this part, Sergeant Major Kyle will call me out on it. Gloucester learned very quickly. By the time we got to the bridge battle, which was, I think it was the last battle, one of their fighters picked up on lesson number 1. Which we had explained, they can pick up the missile weapons and throw them back at us. So they can pick up javelins and axes and throw them back at us if the battle ended long enough. But they couldn't shoot arrows back at us if they didn't have bows. And since none of them had any arrows to start the battle with, none of them were bringing bows onto the field. When we got to the bridge battle, one of their female fighters finally realized this is going to be a long battle because it's very narrow. It's going to take a while for the lines to actually break through. And there are going to be archers shooting from our side. So she brought a bow. And she comes onto the field with a bow, and all of our archers are cheering, going, finally! They figured it out! And she goes to get into line and then stops and runs back off the field and comes back with a sword. And we're cheering some more. Going, she learned lesson number 2! Hooray! I don't know if she ever actually got to shoot any arrows back at us. I'd like to think she did. I'd also like to think that all of my archers concentrated on her and took her out because she was clearly the intelligent one. But I definitely wanted to mention that they did learn quickly, and it was very encouraging and fun to see. And so I sent in my 2 sergeants with their tower shields. Behind them was Sir Mikos with his war shield. Our tower shields were 2 foot by 4 foot. His war shield was 4 foot by 3 foot, because that's the max size of a war shield. And so you've got the 2 sergeants up front with their swords and board. You've got Mikos covering from the top, so there is no target. We then had 2 men behind them that were like 6'4" and 6'5". Huge men with pole arms over the top. And then the rest of my infantry behind that, all with javelins, because they allowed missile weapons. So they're just blindly hurling javelins over the top of our line, raining them down on their line. And then we have all 5 of our archers lined up on the side, shooting into the side. Very Battle of Helm's Deep-esque, where the elves were shooting into the side of that shield wall, of the orcs that were coming up the causeway. But they'd managed to pull another shield out of somewhere. Somebody had another shield, and one of them was a big Norman kite shield, and it covered just about everything. And I'm far enough away because of the location of the battlefield that I can't get a good shot. And he was covering his head entirely too well, but because it's a Norman shield, it tapers towards the bottom. One of his legs was exposed. So I'm trying to shoot him in the leg, and I keep missing. But where the whole calling your hits comes in. The 2 lines closed up. They got in close. Sergeant Major was ready. As soon as they were in range, thwack, smacks the guy, the front shield guy, right square in the head. With right hand, so the edge of the wall is here, smacks the guy and just knocks him off the bridge. And since there's a bridge, the guy was going to do this big flourish of falling to his knee, ah! Wilhelm scream and everything, I'm sure. But he didn't say dead. He didn't acknowledge that he was already dead, and he was still moving. And so as he's doing his dramatic fall off the bridge, he takes 3 more hits to the head from the Sergeant Major, just whap, 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 as the guy goes down. And it's just obliterated on the ground. So he's lying there on the battlefield, slightly stunned probably, in between the 2 lines, because they weren't going anywhere. We weren't advancing, they weren't advancing, so he's just dead there, halfway off the bridge. And I'm trying to shoot the guy with the Norman shield in the leg, because having him get legged in this situation would be a serious disadvantage. But I keep missing, and I keep hitting the dead guy in the face. So I put 3 arrows into this poor dead guy's face, who's already taken 4 sword hits to the head. When the marshal, the safety marshal, the referee as it were, from their side, comes walking over and goes, "Captain Xavier, I know you can't hear him say that he's dead, but I'm pretty sure he's dead. Why do you keep hitting him?" And the truth was, well, I'm aiming for the guy behind him, but I miss. But I'm not going to say that to the enemy. So I look this marshal dead in the eye and go, "It's funny," and shoot him again. At which point, I think Sergeant finally took out the Norman Kite guy, and they went over the top of him, and it was a slaughter. I went up to the guy afterwards and apologized profusely. I explained, "I was aiming for the guy behind you, I'm sorry." He's like, "I didn't know." I was like, "Should I yell? But I'm dead, I shouldn't be yelling. Why does he keep shooting me? I'm already, come on!" It ended up, they had a blast. And then, to make sure that they really had fun, after the last battle, then we divided the sides up evenly, because we wanted them to have a really good fight. And so far they really hadn't. It had really been just slaughter after slaughter after slaughter. So we just counted off 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, split the 2 sides evenly, and I put Sergeant Kyle in charge of one line, I put Sergeant Christian in charge of the other, Sergeant Carl in charge of the other line, and then their pole armor, the one guy on their side who used pole armor, had asked me for some advice, because he had no idea how to use the thing. He just made it the day before and didn't know how to use it. And so I gave him I was giving him basic pointers and tips, and here's how you can use it, and here's how you should move, and keep, you've got reach, so make sure they don't get close enough, don't let them rush you. Here's how to parry, here's how to, use the leverage and this and that and all of that. And in the meantime, the two shield walls are fighting. And I had trained my sergeants too well, because they both attempted to execute the exact same maneuver at the exact same time, which was to attempt to curl their opponent's left flank, which is usually the weaker flank, because you generally have your right-handed people on your right flank, which will be up against the left-handed people of their flank, and you're going to try to turn their flank. And they both tried to do it at the exact same time, because there weren't any lefties on either line at this point. And so the 2 lines attempted to curl each other's line, and literally just ended up rotating around each other and just switching sides on the battlefield without ever engaging. And it was hilarious to watch. And then the 2 sides just hit and just went at it, and it was so much fun. We let them play with all the missile weapons, and then they had a blast, and they were going, "I'm going to make a dozen arrows, and I'm going to make this, and I'm going to make that, and next year we'll show you," and it was just so much fun. They did actually end up getting some points. They got several of the arts points, because we didn't have any new people. In arts, it's based on how many entries you've had. So they've got a brand new, never entered anything before category, people who've entered a couple of things category, and a people who have entered lots of things category. We only had the 2 later categories. We had no brand new people. So we weren't even able to compete, and so they automatically got those 2 points, and we got all the other points. In archery, the Sergeant Major committed an act of psychological warfare that was just unparalleled. We were shooting at a range that had been set up, 20 yards, and there was a stiff cross breeze. And as a result, everyone was having trouble with archery, because you were getting blown off course. Most of us weren't firing particularly heavy bows. We weren't firing, 60-pound hunting bows or 100-pound war bows. We were shooting target bows, 25, 30, 35, pound draw, and with relatively light arrows, and so they were getting blown all over the place. And Gloucester had gone first, and they had shot abysmally. They barely hit the target at all. And then Sergeant Kyle steps up. Now, Kyle is not a great archer. Kyle knows this. But Kyle has really nice equipment. We had a guy in our group who taught himself to hand make English longbows. And he made gorgeous bows. Hand-carved buffalo horn knock points. Laminated multiple layers of different hardwoods. All, you know, that were just beautiful, beautiful bows. And then Hamish was our resident Fletcher. He would make the arrows to match. So he would make the arrows that were exactly your proper draw length, that were the proper weight for the weight of bow that you were firing, and all of that. And so we had just amazing equipment. Between the two of them making our gear, we had amazing archery equipment. So you did not need to be a great archer to do well. The gear made up for a lot of it. And in this case, Kyle had his bow made at hunting weight. He got a 60-pound longbow and had heavy arrows made for it. So it did not notice the wind. But he steps up, and they, when they shot, we had somebody who scored them, and when we shot, they had somebody who scored us, just to make sure it was fair. And so Dorn was doing the range mastering, he's doing the scoring, and Sergeant Kyle comes up and says, "You're probably not going to need that pencil. I am the worst archer in all of Alhambra," and shoots a perfect bullseye. He broke the cross in the center of the target, just dead center. And apparently, according to Kyle, you could see Dorn's soul leave his body at this point. It's just... I don't think Kyle hit the target with the next 6 or 5 arrows, and it didn't matter. He had already done the damage. And it was a lot of fun. It ended up being way more fun than I thought it was going to be. They took getting stomped... They went to the war knowing they were going to lose. And so they ended up with a very good attitude about it, of we're just going to charge and get slaughtered and blah. And since we did the pickup battles afterwards of, okay, let's just have fun, everyone had a lot of fun. And they came to our camp and we hung out and there was singing and dancing and music and drinking and all of that stuff. And then at court the next day, I had Dorn brought to me, "How very dare you invade my land, I hope you've learned your lesson." And he was made to swear fealty to Alhambra. If we should go to war, you must go to war with us. You must swear to never invade my land again, and all of that. Like you would if you had just conquered somebody in a medieval war. It was well known we were going to have another war next year, and this year it would be us hosting, which means he had to invade, which means we know he's going to break this oath, and it's all part of the storyline. And that's one of what I find to be really fun in games like Adria, is when you embrace the story. You don't have to. You don't have to get into character, you don't have to have a story behind the wars, you don't have to get into the role play, but it sure makes it more fun when you do. And I do that with HVZ. You don't have to get into, you know, the whole, I am a professional zombie hunter, or, you know, the zombies, or the fake blood, or the gear, or all that. You don't have to. But I find it more fun. But for those people who don't, they don't need to do that, and they shouldn't be pressured into doing it if they don't want to. Let people have fun how they see fit. But we definitely had a lot of fun at that war. A lot of friends were made, camaraderie was had, plans were made. Everything about it was, that first border war was a lot of fun. So, there you have it. There is the story of the first border war. Up for next stories will, of course, be the second border war. And unfortunately, the last border war, as far as I know. There may have been more since I quit playing, but it was the last one while I was in the group. But we did have another war the next year, and it was on a much grander scale. Unfortunately, it didn't end as well. But it did end up with me very thoroughly cementing my reputation at the Imperial level. So, you know, I think I've mentioned that in some of the other story times of what happened at the outcome of this war. So, second border war will definitely be a story. Captain Xavier Learns About Art was at second place for this. It lost by 1%. So there was a lot of people that wanted to hear about how Captain Xavier learned about art. And then the last one... What was the other option from last time? That's right, the last one was the history of the kitty pike blocks. How I learned how to march with pike and musket, and where I picked up the concept of the kitty pike blocks, and how that led to us eventually guest lecturing at colleges. So that's also a very interesting story. Nothing but good options for next time. So survey for what story I tell next time will be down in the description. Do feel free to vote, and thank you for watching.